their own sketches. And then that turned into 250,000 drawings that had those transparency layers. They were layered over top of each other to create the 119,500 frames. So there were 119,500 photographs taken to create the frames that ran at that 24 per second to create an 83-minute movie. So those are the most relevant numbers that tie to that information. It took 750 artists working together to pull off all of that stuff. And then, of course, then there were the other people that had to do their other parts.
Is this considered analog?
So this is analog, yes, because it's that actual images that were captured on film, which is an analog capture. So the next, when that was digitized, they photographed the original things to capture it, and it was 4,500 gigabytes. That was huge for home use, so then they reduced it down and took samples of it. And it turned into, so if you download or stream Snow White, HD is 3.48 gigabytes, and it's 1.47 SD to stream or download. So if it's on that digital size, that's the digital format when they went and digitized the frames rather than having the analog frames.
Me and my friend made a 5-second animation of a TikTok dance, and it took 200 frames.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of frames, a lot of pieces that go into it, which is why the next significant change in animation, which is still analog, happened with 101 Dalmatians. This was done out of desperation because Sleeping Beauty bombed, made no money, they lost millions because people didn't go and watch it. So Disney was about ready to go bankrupt. His staff, or his animators, went from the 750 with Snow White, and he had 100 to work with. That's what he could employ and could afford. And he had money to try and do one more film. If it worked, great. If not, he was out of business. So we had to figure out what he could do with a very low budget. So paint costs money, paper costs money, all of that costs a lot of money on top of employees. So we had a very low budget, very low staff. What could he do to pull off one final movie that could hopefully save his company? And that's where he made 101 Dalmatians. Is there a lot of lack of color with a Dalmatian? Kind of convenient, right? Done on purpose, guys. Because a lot less paint and a lot less ink needed when you're dealing with something black and white. Photocopiers were developed around that time. So rather than having the pencil drawings and paying someone to ink them, they were photocopied. Some problems with photocopies, especially at the time, they'd pick up a lot and add a lot of specks and dots to what was being photocopied. So Disney, on purpose, had the backgrounds be very sketch-like. So if you've ever watched it or if you go back and watch it, when you see someone who draws and sketches a lot, you'll see kind of like a lot of rough lines. They did that for the backgrounds on 101 Dalmatians. So when they had the photocopies of the dogs that were just kind of sitting in the background, that all those specks and scratches that would show up could be just blended in with the background and look like it was done on purpose. So that desperation he incorporated into the animation style to cover up the flaws of the photocopies. And so in the end, he was able to make 113,000 frame film that was 79 minutes long, so a little bit shorter than Snow White. But he only had to use 800 gallons of paint, which is a fraction of what some of the other movies needed.
15 football fields.
Yeah, 15 football fields with the paint just to make those frames. But it worked. People loved the movie, made a ton of money, and then he was able to stick around. And guys, don't put your stuff away because I want to get you some of the data for our digital. Because Lion King in '94 had a 2-minute CGI scene, which was the wildebeest stampede that killed Mufasa at the beginning. So that was the first CGI that was used, which is computer animation. And even though it was 2 minutes long, it took 3 years for the animators to figure out how to do those 2 minutes. But think about a herd of hundreds of wildebeest drawing consistently as they're running through the canyons. Would that be very difficult to do, a herd, to have good and smooth? So they either had to change how they wanted the movie to start with fewer and not a herd with the stampede, or try and pull it off by doing a computer, which that's the version they pulled off, and made millions and millions of money, dollars. But they had 119,000 frames in that 87 minutes, and they only had 1,000 unpainted backgrounds they had to work with, and only 1 million drawings, so a lot less than what they needed with Snow White. And then Toy Story is the original full-length CGI. Let me skip to the relevant numbers. The reason it was about toys, when Disney went to Pixar and said, and this was just a year after Lion King, like, we think this computer animation's a thing. You're at one of the companies. If we give you $30 million, can you figure out how to do it and make us 3 movies? Pixar, even though they did not have the technology or they know how to do it, they're like, sure. So they took the $30 million and they're like, we have to make a movie. We can't animate stuff very effectively, especially for long periods of time. We can do basic shapes. What's basic shapes? Toys. Let's make a movie about toys, because that's what our technology we think we can develop to pull off. So they made a toy movie. And that's why the story was about toys, because that's what they thought they could pull off. And they did. So there was 114,000 frames. The animators still had to go through that process. They were just telling the computer what to do rather than artists what to do. It still took 120 hours per second of human work, but it took 800,000 machine hours once they made all of that code for the computer to render it to turn it into a movie. So fewer people, but a lot of times still had to be done. It was just by computers instead. So then Bugs Life came next.
I love that movie.
Do you know why it was about bugs? Basic shapes. They wanted to do better than traditional couldn't do, and that was crowds. So what's a basic shape that comes in the big numbers? Bugs. The movie was about bugs because that's what they thought they could do with their technology and make crowds traditional animation couldn't. And frames were about the same, but a lot more detail to be incorporated. Monsters U, we could get longer. Significance of Monsters U, backgrounds became animated. Backgrounds before couldn't really have much motion, so computers could not only animate characters, animate backgrounds. And as we moved on to Frozen, Anna's hair had 24,000 individually animated hairs, so it could move very lifelike. The detail on their clothing could not be done with traditional animation to be repeated accurately. Computers could do that. And just I want to tell you the rendering hours of Frozen. 4,000 computers took 30 hours each to render the 146,000 frames. People didn't change, but because the detail was being added with all of the animations, computers, which are cheaper, were able to do a lot and add a lot of that extra info. All right, see you guys now. So the second highest. Yeah, so nothing even, nothing
It's
even.
all in Palestine.
And Lion King
And
don't
that's
beat out,
a lot of
I shot most live action movies until the last probably 10 years.
I saw a lot, like on